schools exist for a reason. They don't just exist for our individual children. They exist for the state as well. They provide security and economic security for the state, not just for our children. So because of that, the system needs to be accessible and excellent and affordable, and it needs to be streamlined from early childhood through grade 16. So that's just kind of a basic thought. You may hear that the education budget is half of the state's budget. Well, I'm here to tell you something that people forget. It is the only constitutional mandate our state has. That's it. They have a half mandate that says they need to take care of the trunk lines of interstate highways. So as you come zooming across 94, you don't come to a crash in Minnesota and then try and move on. But that's it. So this is what they're supposed to take care of. So when they tell you it's a large part of the budget, yeah, it is the reason you're formed. And this was placed in our Constitution as one of the very first and only things. People go, there are 5 people in the state that can tell you how education is funded. I hate that. I think we're pretty smart people. I think we can figure it out. If you don't think that's possible, I'll sit until you can explain it to me. So just tell me. So here's the base. The base is that there's a per pupil formula, and that's established by the legislature, not by your school board, not by your superintendent, strictly by the legislature. And that number is figured out once every 2 years. This is the year that it'll be figured out for the next couple of years, but it's established at the Capitol. That times AMCUs, the adjusted marginal cost pupil unit. That's a child. You took the time to name them John or Jane. To the state, they're an AMCU. So this formula, set by the state, times a child, their age, if they have special needs, if they have...
That's the adjusted part?
That's the adjusted part.
Okay.
If they're free and reduced lunch, if they qualify, if they live in poverty, whatever, that's the adjusted part. That's it. That's what your district has to spend flexibly. So, imagine how important that number is. This is the same in every single district in the state. So this is the number that stays the same in every district. So that's the number that we have to look at. Imagine the importance of that number. Today that number is $5,124.
And that's assuming that that child lives within the school district?
No,
No,
the child
that's per
comes to
period.
the school district.
Okay.
And you do not pay if that child, those dollars do not come to you if your child is in a private school. It is only $5,124 for every child who walks through the doors of this school.
And do you get that whole $5,000 if you don't live in the district but you walk in the school?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Exactly. The only difference is open enrollment children, their levy dollars stay in the district that they are coming from.
Okay.
So you don't get their levy dollars. This was done by the Association of Metropolitan School Districts. I actually believe Mahtomedi is a member of AMSD. So that's why I used this particular chart. They figured the red line is inflation, simple inflation of that per pupil number. And this is 20 years. So I think it's important that people realize it's not, the last 5 years. In 20 years, the state has increased that formula half of inflation every year. Half. Inflation's gone up 3.1%. This number's gone up, on average, 1.4%.
Is that inflation number based on GDP? Is that a school
CPI.
cost? CPI.
It is CPI, and IPD, which is the implicit price deflator, is actually the number that should be used for government because CPI puts in it housing. All right? So obviously schools don't have to deal with housing, but the CPI went up 3.1%. The IPD, the implicit price deflator, which is really what government entities need to purchase, went up 5%. This is based simply on CPI.
Okay.
So this is the lower of the two. And with that, they're saying that if today we had simple inflation, you would have almost $2,000 more per child. So walk into your classroom, count the kids in the classroom, times 2,000 more. So what happened? We know this story. This is the story, right? The first thing we did is we prayed for growth. Not only prayed for growth, a lot of school districts went out and advertised for growth. A lot of school districts went out in a very entrepreneurial way and started figuring out what would people like. all-day kindergarten, Spanish immersion, French immersion. Maybe we could have a specific arts program at our school. What we were trying to do was draw people away. Come to our district, come to our district. Why? Because we're able to give you this, and you're able to give us $5,124. Now, we can argue rightness and wrongness of all of this, but that is true, that people attempted to live with growth. The second thing they did is cuts. And all of us have been looking around at cuts for a very long time. I've been doing this kind of work for 8 years. I was a school board member for 8 years prior to that. So 16 years I have seen cuts year after year. The question that school boards ask themselves at this time of year is, what can we cut? I am told in the olden days, people said, what can we add? I have never lived in that environment. The next thing they did is spent fund balances down. Now, people are funny about this fund balance gig because it used to be called the school's savings accounts. And many times I'll open up the newspaper and they'll say slush funds. Oh, I just love that word. Let me tell you what a fund balance is. First off, and by the way, schools are the only entity that have to have an independent audit done every single year. They're the only government entity that is a requirement of. And those auditors say you should have a 10% fund balance at minimum. 10%. Do you know what yours is?
It's right around there. It's slightly below.
Okay. 5% keeps you afloat for 2 weeks. Okay? 2 weeks. I talked to a district last night that has a 2%, so they're afloat for 4 days. What does afloat mean? Float means that you can pay for your buses, you can pay for the toilet paper that comes to your door. You laugh, but Stillwater had to turn away a truck of toilet paper once because they didn't have the $3,000 to pay for it. It is to pay your payroll. It is to pay your bills if, whoops, the state doesn't pay you on time. That would never happen. The truth is that happens all the time. So if you don't have a fund balance to provide this float, where do you get those monies? Now, we're all pretty smart people. If you have a need in your home for extra dollars, where do you go? Probably not mom and dad. I'm looking around the room.
Buy cheaper toilet paper.
You buy cheaper toilet paper. That's the first thing you do. But if you need to pay a payroll and you know how much it actually is, you got to pay your mortgage. You're not going to go to your mortgage holder and say, could I pay less this year? You know, could I? No, you go to a bank. You go to a bank, you borrow, and what do we all pay when we go to banks and borrow? Ooh, that would be interest. So now the school is incurring interest because they didn't have a fund balance. So when people call it a slush fund, it drives me over the top. Because truthfully, if you don't have a decent fund balance, at times when the state doesn't pay you, you have to borrow, and then your taxpayer has to pay interest on the borrowing. So when people say, spend your fund balances down, they're just slush funds, be very leery of that. And then the biggie, they passed local levies. How do we know this? Well, because before 1990, less than half of schools anywhere in the state had local levies in play. And those levies were being used for very specific local initiatives. It might be something very specific that they wanted, extra language classes, whatever. Today, that's 92%. And in many districts, their local levy accounts for, hang on to your hats, 20% of their budget. That means 20 cents out of every dollar is coming from a local levy. That's a lot of money. Why? Because in the mid-90s, they had this great idea at the legislature. They said, you know, we're going to come to a time, and it's going to happen by 2005, where we're not going to have dependence on levies. We're just not. So you know what? Any levy put in place right now has to sunset after 10 years. That's it. It has to go away. Before 1990, if you had a levy for Matamidi, you said to your school board members, you were authorized to use up to this amount of money, ad infinitum. If you misuse it, we will take out our toll at the ballot box. But the legislature said, no, you need to absolutely sunset those. So a lot of those school districts, in fact, now we're at 92%, are going back to their voters to renew levies that they have been using for up to 20% of their actual operating budget. So I want to sell this levy. All right, here we go. We need a local levy. Well, this sounds like new money. Well, actually, it's the same amount of money that you paid last year, but if your house has gone up in value, I'd like to know who you are, but if your house has gone up to value, or even if it hasn't, chances are you're going to be paying a little bit more for the same dollar going to your school. Well, it's logical that the person says, what do I get for this? Oh, here's the answer. Less cuts? Oh, that's a sales job. Boy, let me try and pass a levy on that. And that's what people are doing all over the states because now you have to renew the very levy that has been giving you 20 cents out of every dollar. Because the legislature said by 2005, we will not be dependent on levies. Yet by 2009, only 8% don't have them. How do we know this is true? This is a great slide because this slide shows you the state aid since 2003. So it's been on a low decline, but starting in 2003, it has really tanked. The blue line is what the states have given. The green line are levies. By the way, when the state says how much money they give schools, they take your levy into account. Okay? All right. I just want you to know that. I find that very interesting. They don't say, well, the taxpayer does this. But at any rate, notice the red line is the money that you have. Notice how the green line and the blue line, or the red line and the green line, mirror each other. If it weren't for these green lines, you'd have the blue. Let's look specifically at Mahtomedi. This you can have every state, every district, all 341 districts in the state are on this particular site, and you can look at this. So you can see exactly what was happening all along, specifically to Mahtomedi. If it were not for this levy, which by the way needs a renewal, you'd have the blue line. That's how we know. That's how we know that we are levy dependent.
Wouldn't Mahtomedi's levy dependence be even stronger with the fact that we do have 20% open enrollment, and if the levy stays with the district that they're moving from?
No, I would say what happens is you don't get any of those levy dollars. You're not
Right.
levy dependent. I would say it's possible that you are getting less dollars per kid than if they were all in the confines of Mahtomedi. Yes, that I would say
But
is
in
true.
order to cover all the kids that are now being schooled here, our levy's going to have to go up, right?
Oh, there's usually a wash on that because you have 20% bringing $5,124. So usually that levy is not as big a deal.
Okay.
Because you've got a lot of kids who are bringing you that per pupil formula.
Okay.
Do you have any data on what the Mahtomedi cost